This is In-Ear Insights, the Trust Insights podcast. AI Academy for Marketers is an online education platform designed to help marketers like you understand, pilot, and scale artificial intelligence. The AI Academy features deep dive certification courses of 3 to 5 hours, along with dozens of short courses, 30 to 60 minutes each, taught by leading AI and marketing experts. Join Katie Robert, CEO of Trust Insights, and me, Christopher Penn, Chief Data Scientist of Trust Insights, for 3 of our courses in the Academy: 5 use cases of AI for content marketing, intelligent attribution modeling for marketing, and detecting and mitigating bias in marketing AI. The Academy is designed for manager-level and above marketers and largely caters to non-technical audiences, meaning you don't need a programming background or a background in data science to understand and apply what you learn. One registration gives you unlimited access to all the courses, an invitation to a members-only Slack instance, and access to new courses every quarter. Join now and save $100 off registration when you go to trustinsights.ai/AI Academy and use registration code PEN100 today. That's trustinsights.ai/AI Academy and use registration code PEN100 today. In this week's In-Ear Insights, we are talking about the generational gaps and changes in audience data. How do you understand what a group of people that you're marketing to is thinking if you are not in that group of people? Katie, you want to set the stage for how we came about this?
Yeah, absolutely. So we were asked by one of our clients last week about they're starting to think about their 2021 planning, and they're trying to figure out how to propose certain initiatives. And within that comes some research. And they are a company that, is business to consumer. So they're trying to reach younger generations, the, 18 to 30-year-old, the 30 to 40-year-old, and trying to understand those behaviors and where those particular sets of consumers get their information and how they behave online. And it started to go down this conversation of they have a desktop website that's a little bit old and clunky and no real mobile experience, no real app or anything. And so we started doing that research, and we very quickly realized that the younger generations that they're trying to target are 100% on mobile. And so that comes up with a really interesting question of, how do you pivot to reach that audience? Or will you even, because is your product something they even want or are interested in? And so it just started, making me think, as someone who I'm personally not great on social media. It's just not my thing. I don't really enjoy it. But there's all these new social media apps. You have TikTok, and I mean, Lord knows, I'll probably name a bunch of things that aren't even real things. And so it just sort of got the wheel spinning of like, how do you reach those audiences in an authentic way where they're not looking at it going, Grandpa, cut it out. Like, this is my thing.
Well, let me ask you this: how do you develop empathy for a group that is not you? So, obviously there's some things, for example, with all the different current events, I will never, and you and I will never know what it is truly like to be a Black American, right? It's just simply because we are not that thing, but we can develop empathy. So how do you develop empathy in a repeatable, almost scientific way?
It's a lot of listening, and it's listening to actual conversations, not just reading what people have posted online, because there's a lot of missing, inflection in the terms. There might be sarcasm, there might be sadness, there might be different emotions that you can't get necessarily from just reading something. So you actually have to take the time and put in the effort to stop and talk to these audiences that you're trying to target. And so if I was the client and I said, I want to bring on the 18 to 25-year-old, you know, audience segment, I need to find a bunch of 18 to 25-year-olds and talk to them and learn their behaviors. Because I might be targeting them and trying to learn how they behave online, but ultimately they might say, I'm not even interested in your product. Why are you bothering with me? This is not how we operate. one of the reasons why this came up for me was I saw, a friend of mine was selling his car and he has two teenagers, and someone had made the comment, well, why don't you just hold on to the car for them as a first car? And he said, oh, well, they don't see a reason to drive. They have Uber. They think driving is for old people. And it was one of those moments where it just sort of, I filed it away for later because it was, oh, okay, the younger generation really does do things so drastically differently from even my generation. And I'm what, like Gen Y? I don't really know. But like, I don't feel like I'm that far off from that age group, but yet somehow we're, millions of miles apart.
I don't know. I mean, I don't feel like you are millions of miles apart. In one of the things that always I keep in the back of my head for situations like this is what Jeff Bezos built Amazon on, which is focus on the things that don't change. Like the how you get around has changed for that generation, for example, but the fact that they still need to get around has not
Mhm.
changed, right? So they still need to get from point A to point B. So if your market is people who drive cars, then yes, that 18-year-old TikTok sensation may not be the person, but their driver sure is, because they need the services to keep their car in good running order. But I think it's when you step back, there's the market research aspect, which is super important. But I think you're right. There's also the persona level research where you maybe some of the higher end market research firms do this. They have people who just shadow your subject audience for a day. They sit in your house, and you obviously get paid to have somebody just showing up at your house for a day, but just observing how this is done. Edison Research did a phenomenal piece on smart speakers, watching people how they use them, and had people in other people's homes and stuff, and discovered like for a certain segment of the audience, predominantly elderly people, those smart speakers are actually conversation companions. Like they do something to hold off loneliness and stuff, and it was just fascinating to see that behavior. Again, focusing on something that doesn't change. You still want some kind of interaction with your environment. So when we look at something like a TikTok, for example, when you look at that, what do you see that is consistent with human behavior?
So first off, disclaimer, I have never opened TikTok in my life. I don't have it as an app on my phone. Um, and it was only recent. I'm still like, is it like Vine? Is it Instagram? I don't know. So, but the commonality is that sense of community, that sense of, well, part of it is the look at me generation, where look what I can do. I tied my shoes, I have to put it online. That's something I'll never understand. And that makes me an old fuddy-duddy. But like it's that sense of connection and community that is the common thread through all social media.
And there's a lot of self-validation. And
Yes.
to your question, it is an awful lot like Vine.
Good. Good to know.
with more music. Um, so then as a marketer, if people are still looking for validation, if people are still looking for the approval of their peers, if they are still, some of them are aspiring to be the next Kardashians or whatever, how do you then work with that? If you are trying to essentially recruit these people to your audience, and your product or service is uh, important but seen as not essential by that group of folks, how do you connect the bridge? How do you use empathy to connect that bridge?
Well, it sounds like you're starting to go down the road a little bit of influencer marketing and using TikTok as your source of influencers versus, Instagram or Facebook. But, it's again, I think it all comes down to having that conversation of, do we even have anything that you and your peers would be interested in? What can we do differently? And I think that that's a question that a lot of companies, well, first of all, I don't know that a lot of companies are reaching out directly to talk to those folks. I mean, we know that there's still a large portion of companies that aren't even using data to make decisions. So I would be surprised if they were also then creating focus groups of different audience segments to figure out, your thoughts and opinions and behaviors. But in the event that they are, I think it's asking the question of, do we even have anything that you're interested in? You mentioned Edison Research. Another great company that focuses on user behavior is IDEO, and they're out of Boston, and they spend an enormous amount of time shadowing people and just watching how they go about their daily, tasks and where they struggle and where there's room for improvement. And that is the kind of user research that a lot of companies don't do. They really sort of put this controlled little website in front of you and say, hit this button. Okay, everybody could find the button. Good. We checked the box on user research. We're done. We can launch our website. But that's not really the kind of user research that's needed in the case like the one that we're talking about, where you're trying to break into a whole different demographic and you know nothing about their behaviors. You just have a lot of assumptions.
Yeah, it's basically anthropology. You have to go
Mhm.
and study the
The
18-year-old
natives
in
in
the
their,
wild.
yes, exactly. That's exactly it. It's a lot like anthropology. And I think that that is a huge skill set needed for marketers.
And it's something that, for good or ill, machines cannot do reliably yet. We are getting there with some things like facial recognition and stuff, which of course brings up a whole other entirely thorny different discussion topic for another episode. But the other thing that I think of companies are missing is there's no overall strategy. To your point, is this the market for us? Or do we need a product marketing campaign first to build a product that does serve that audience's needs? And I think there is a massive gap there where, yeah, if you have, say, a brand new grill cleaning spray for your charcoal grill, there's a certain audience that uses that product or service, and trying to market it to apartment dwellers who aren't even allowed to have any kind of grill seems like a bit of a miss. So there's some aspect to that. So the question would be for that company, what else can you make for this? We did some
Mhm.
work a while ago for a food and beverage company where they were trolling through their customer inboxes, and we've identified there were two new products on the market that they were being asked, do you have a formulation to help stabilize these things? And they're like, we don't even know what these things are. I didn't know what they were either. I'd never heard of hemp milk. Um, but to your point, there's a lot of listening that could go into that, even if it's just looking at your customer service inbox. Where else should people be listening?
I mean, social media is a good place to start, but I would definitely caution you that that is not the only source of data that you should be using, because there is, you know, social media is a tough place to get really true good opinions. Social media tends to be a very emotional place where people leave their remarks. You might do better in more private or targeted forums, like specific Reddit forums or sub forums. Um, you know, Reviews of similar companies, so Yelp reviews, Google reviews, um, just to start to get the lexicon of how people talk about things, to start to get their language. So at the very least, you can repeat back to them things that they are comfortable hearing, like words and terms and phrases. But there you can't. You're absolutely right. AI cannot have that conversation with someone and get that insight. So I would say, the missing step is that either a focus group or a one-on-one interview with your target customer base, because you need to understand sort of those like nuances of body language and the nuances of tone, and certain word choices. And sometimes the things that aren't said are just as powerful as the things that are said, and the pauses and the silences.
The challenge for some companies is that market research is, as our friend Tom Webster says, reassuringly expensive
Mhm.
to do all. How do you tackle that when you do not have reassuringly large budgets?
There are smaller ways to start. So, I mean, obviously, you've done your data collection with your social listening and your customer complaint office, but maybe it's a small Gen Pop survey. Just to start to get a little bit more color into opinions and behaviors, or maybe it's starting a free community for certain interests and then asking questions there. It's a lighter weight ask, It's not that in-depth big market research project, but at least then you're getting the right kinds of people that you want to be attracting into your audience base. Once you've done some of those things, maybe you can say, hey, I don't have a huge budget, but perhaps I could talk to one or two people for 20 minutes and just sort of ask them more inf- more questions to get information that will help further my research. So I think it doesn't have to be a big blown out, but I don't know that you can completely skip over the talking to people,
Hmm.
regardless of your budget.
Okay. How do you get around the confirmation bias? Because a lot of things companies do wrong, really wrong with research is, uh, a silly example is how much do you like our product? A lot, really a lot. I super love your product, right?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Designing any kind of research, it's a different skill set. And it's not something that marketers inherently have. It doesn't, unless you take a market research course, you're not going to be taught how to properly, do survey construction and, develop unbiased questions. So, do a little research on your own. It might be sort of Googling around for best practices for creating an unbiased market research survey. I'm sure those resources exist. Again, joining a community like the one that we have, it's trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers. It's a free Slack community. You can ask those questions in a community to say, hey, I have a list of survey questions. Can someone eyeball these to see if they look biased or not? And so it's getting that gut check against the work that you're creating. Don't create it in a vacuum. It's tough because budgets are really small right now, but you want to do the best work. You want to continue to grow and scale. And so it's really trying to think differently around the resources that you have at your disposal and maybe using them in a way that you didn't think you could.
From a product marketing perspective, how do we pivot if we know we have something that our desired target audience doesn't want, right? At what point do we say we need to start R&D like right now, or do we try to adapt something? How do we tackle that?
Well, I think first and foremost, if you know you have something that your target audience doesn't want, don't continue to try to shove it down their throats and say, buy this thing. I know eventually I'm going to wear you down and you're going to want it, which unfortunately I do see a lot of companies do. They're not willing to pivot because it can be costly. And so again, it starts with collecting that information from that target audience of what do you want? And then really taking a hard look at the services that you have or the products and saying, is there something that we can pivot to, be adaptable to create something for this audience? Maybe we don't. I think R&D is something that should be done all of the time, even if it's done in like very small doses. Um, you should always have something kind of like, stewing in the background. What do you think, Chris?
I'm of two minds of this. I loved the tinkering around and stuff like that, and certainly we do a ton of it. But also, it's one of those things where that as priorities change and as companies scale, your R&D does have to at some point get a little more focused than just pure academic research, because otherwise you can burn a lot of time for no good reason. Um, when it comes to like how do you build something new, again, it goes back to that anthropology. When you look at the way somebody does something, what are the obstacles? And the challenge for a lot of companies is going to be you will in some ways be competing with the problem you're trying to solve. Is so for example, let's use Uber as an example. If Uber um, is a problem, there's some aspect of the Uber experience that's a problem, and you're trying to find a way to insert yourself into the conversation, you are actually competing theoretically with Uber itself, because hopefully Uber's own product marketing managers are doing the same kind of research and going, oh, this part of the app is problematic, right? Or this part of the experience is problematic. How do we resolve that? Um, Getting around that requires you to have some level of insight into what your competitors' capabilities are, and that is yet again an entirely different research area. Because let's say you're trying to deal with the issue of safety. Some people rightfully feel that they don't feel safe in an Uber. Well, how do you work around that? Um, Uber is already working on autonomous vehicles, so there's no other driver in the car. There's no way for you to have an unpleasant interaction with a driver who isn't there. So how do you work around that? Those are the challenges that I think a lot of market researchers also forget about when they're doing product marketing research.
I would agree with that. And so it sounds like what we're coming around to is you can't get around doing some level of research if you're trying to break into a new audience segment, or just, create marketing plans in general if you want to continue to move forward and, not be the product from the 1990s that hasn't changed and evolved at all. Um, yeah, companies need to start using some data, any data, to make these decisions, to find out, what does my audience want. The worst possible thing that you can do is sit there, in your office chair and go, I know what I want, therefore it must be what my audience wants. That is
Hmm.
the absolute wrong thing to do. And I've seen it happen in action, and I've seen it tank products because the stakeholders, the decision makers, are what we call an N of one. I know best. I want to move this button over here. I want it to be blue. I want it to, wake me up at 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever the thing is. But that doesn't mean that you speak for the majority of your audience. And I think that that is such a huge mistake that is so common. It happens
Hmm.
all the time.
Yep. As always, we recommend starting with, as you mentioned with the Facebook example and 100% mobile users, use the data to figure out how bad the problem is first. In
Yep.
this case, in this example, the problem is 100% of this customer segment does not like the the way the
Will
brand is
not use
working.
desktop.
Exactly. So if you've got more questions about this and market research in general, stop by our Slack group, as Katie mentioned, over at trustinsights.ai/analytics for marketers, and bring your questions. This is a fun topic to discuss, and it's great to get the perspectives of over 1,000 other marketers there. As always, you'll find this episode and many others over at the website, trustinsights.ai. We look forward to hearing from you there. Take care and stay safe. Want help solving your company's data, analytics, and digital marketing problems? Visit trustinsights.ai today and let us know how we can help you.